Hey everybody, it's PartyElite, and today we're taking another look at the Steam Winter Sale. This time we're picking out 10 games that are under or just around $10 that are well worth picking up at a higher price than that for sure. As always, I focus on strategic and tactical games, which means anything from RTS to deck builders to simulation, management, and more besides. You'll find more, slightly pricier recommendations in the video I've linked in the pinned comment below, and if you have any recommendations of your own, don't hesitate to drop them in the comments too. But with all that said, and with timestamps down below, let's begin. Space Engineers is getting a sequel, and if you've not played the first game yet, now's a great time to pick it up and see if you should get excited for number 2. A sandbox survival crafting game that's best enjoyed in multiplayer but still definitely fun to play in solo, Space Engineers does what it says on the tin can, allowing the player to take on the role of a very capable engineer, building all manner of sci-fi constructs as if out of Lego. You can find all kinds of wild creations online to show you the scope here, from mining ships to automated foundries to orbital bombers and warships, but you'll start with nothing more than a handful of tiny hand tools and the vehicle you dropped in on, if that. Space Engineers is one of those games that really hits the nail on the head when it comes to a sandbox approach, with seemingly endless options to explore, limited only by your creativity as a player. I'm always trying to find more time to play it myself, and while it definitely has a steep learning curve, especially for some of the more complex toys at your disposal, it is just such a satisfying game in which to accomplish things. Start on a planet's surface, establish a base of operations, extract resources in great numbers, process them to build various utilities, build a giant spaceship, supply it with fuel, or perhaps establish production capabilities on the ship itself, and then venture out into the deep unknown, taking on space pirates and more. There's so much fun to be had with Space Engineers, and I can highly recommend checking it out. Stirring Abyss is one of those underappreciated gems that you'll have heard me talk about from time to time, especially as a fan of Lovecraftian horror, and the unlikely pairing of genres that the game brings with it, blending turn-based tactics with the aforementioned horror subgenre. Many things claim to be Lovecraftian, but Stirring Abyss manages to capture that sense of overwhelming dread and foreboding by sending you into the depths using an uncanny blend of 2D and 3D graphics. The writing, music, voice acting, and art direction all come together wonderfully to make a horror game that doesn't rely on jump scares and cheap thrills. It brings tension with the fear of the unknown mixed with the classic stresses of survival. Your hit points are running low, your characters are going insane, corruption has reached insurmountable levels, or your divers are running out of oxygen in their tanks and they desperately look for somewhere to get a refill, dodging strange, unknowable beings as they do so. Individual characters have their own stats and traits and action points that they can use to move and engage in combat or use skills, and each character is able to upgrade their skills as they gain experience over time. As you traverse the sea floor trying to rush against the threat of lost oxygen, you'll also be keeping an eye out for scraps, which can be used to repair your submarine you came in on, giving you access to special abilities and options as you get further along in the game. I don't want to spoil too much of this game, as the fear of the unknown and learning as you go along is such a big part of the experience, but I think Stirring Abyss is a fantastic game that didn't get enough attention for all that it managed to pull off. It's very different from the usual formula in the genre, and that makes it all the more worth checking out if you ask me. Endless Legend is just over 10 years old now, and it remains one of the best fantasy 4X games out there. If you've not played it yet, I highly recommend jumping in to give it a try. Playing on randomly generated maps with a multitude of customization options, you lead one of many extremely varied empires to glory with all the usual trappings of the 4X genre. Build cities, expand their areas of influence, battle other factions for supremacy, so on and so forth, but there are a few key factors that make Endless Legend stand above the rest. For one, armies consist of stacks of units, and when two meet to engage in battle, each unit spreads out across the map to engage in combat in a way that makes a location actually matter. Now, if you've played Humankind, which came much later, this will sound familiar, turning the turn-based campaign map into a turn-based tactical battle map for a handful of turns within a turn, asking you to consider all kinds of attributes and traits for your units as they fight. Then there's the unit and hero customization that allows you to modify unit loadouts and abilities, significantly modifying their strengths and weaknesses and otherwise adjusting their attributes based on what equipment you give their variants. Keeping in mind the added resource cost to produce more advanced units, especially when introducing strategic resources that need to be acquired by extractors you build on the map. The heroes also introduce some light RPG elements with their skill trees, allowing you to make them into more powerful generals and governors alike. And finally, the biggest selling point here is just the sheer variety and depth of the world. There are so many cool major and minor factions, each with unique capabilities, ranging from how the roving clans can just move their settlements atop the backs of giant scarabs, or the necrophage's ability to raise the dead under certain conditions, or how the broken lords don't use food, relying on dust instead. And what's more, you can mix and match traits to make your own custom factions using a point-buy system to prevent you from getting carried away. The lore behind these factions is great, and it all makes for a world that's easy to get immersed in, holding up even 10 years since launch. The DLC adds additional factions, quests, and more mechanics at times too, like seasons, points of interest in the water, espionage systems, so on and so forth. So, I'd recommend grabbing the base game at its current extremely low price to see how you like it, and then grabbing all the DLC if the base game lands. Some of them feel like expansions from back in the day, well worth the total sum simply because of just how much they add to the base game. Endless Legend is truly legendary. Inscryption took me by absolute surprise, masquerading as a roguelike deck builder and hiding an insane experience behind that veneer. Now, the game is a deck builder, but what makes it special is the world it's set in, the story it tells, and how it goes about doing so. It's very hard to explain what makes this game so amazing without spoiling that very aspect of it. There are twists and turns, not just from a narrative perspective, but from a mechanics and gameplay perspective too, introducing all kinds of strange, never-before-seen ideas. The first time any one of them happens to you, you're bound to be taken aback, and you're bound to wonder just how deep this rabbit hole goes. It truly is an experience, and I don't want to spoil it in any way, and to be clear, none of this is goofy or silly. The game isn't random for the sake of being random. No, it's all very intentional and very, very compelling. The deck building elements are interesting as they lean into the dark world of the game, asking you to make sacrifices, both in card form and otherwise. And progression is presented in the form of a map with branching paths, with more and more interactions revealed across multiple biomes, each capped with interesting boss battles that are unnerving in their own ways. Or at least that's how the game is presented at first. The card game is simple to understand, but challenging to master as you contend with attack power, HP, and a multitude of attributes in the form of sigils that make familiar cards behave in unexpected ways, and it all comes together nicely to create a game that is just the right amount of challenging in all the right places. Even if you hate deck building games, Inscryption is one you should absolutely try. This is so much more than a roguelike deck builder. There is something really special here, and it's well worth its full price tag, so on sale, it's an absolute no-brainer. Warhammer 40k Mechanicus is a turn-based tactics game you've likely heard me recommend a handful of times already if you follow this channel, and if you haven't, before you click away, rest assured that you don't need to have any knowledge of the IP before you dive into this great gem. There's a sequel coming out soon, so now's a great time to dive in here as you lead an expedition of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a faction that's more machine than man, and uncover a planet that acts as a tomb world for the Necrons, an ancient empire of machines that is lying in rest until you come knocking. That's pretty much all the lore you need to know from Warhammer 40k before you dive into the game, so there you have it. You can pick it up now and have just as much fun as a hardcore fan of the IP. Now, being the curious types that the Adeptus Mechanicus are, coming across a Necron tomb world is seen as an opportunity, so you'll go from point of interest to point of interest on this planet, diving into and crawling through dungeons while racing against time at the same time. Each move you make awakens more of the sleeping Necrons, making each potential battle that much harder as they grow more powerful over time. But with the loot and knowledge lying around, waiting for somebody to scoop it up and use it, it can be difficult to resist the temptation, no matter how difficult things might get. Normally, I'm not a fan of the Doomsday Clock, but it feels good here. Another big and unique selling point here comes during the turn-based battles. Not only are both factions interesting in action thanks to their varied units and capabilities, but because of their augmentations, it makes sense in-universe that they always have a 100% hit chance, which means combat becomes purely about positioning, equipment, and action economy. A variety of tools can be acquired and equipped across your troops with a variety of unit types and squad-wide buffs you can invest resources in too, and the game streamlines some management elements, but in a lore-appropriate way that doesn't take away from the core systems in the game, and beyond all this, the game has an absolutely killer OST. The sound design is to die for, and this one is definitely worth a buy. Age of Wonders Planetfall is the sci-fi spin-off from the 4X Age of Wonders series, and though there's a much more recent game that you'll have heard me recommend time and time again, the sci-fi setting is a good reason to still go back to this prior release. Blending classic turn-based 4X empire building with RPG mechanics and turn-based tactical battles, Age of Wonders Planetfall will first ask you to choose a faction and faction leader, or build one of your own, to then take to a procedurally generated world and face off against a handful of other factions as you race towards one of a handful of win conditions. Establish cities, expand your territorial claims, exploit the world around you to build additional cities, tile improvements, and units, attracting more heroes to your cause to lead your armies, and then develop those heroes over time using the aforementioned RPG mechanics. It's all a wonderful time as you explore the world to find interesting equipment for these very same heroes. Again, gaining experience and leveling them up, and then chasing after landmarks whose liberation can help strengthen your cities with unique capabilities. Seek out quests to further your designs until you inevitably go toe-to-toe with other major factions, and when combat kicks off, you'll get transported to a hex-based battle map where you play a turn-based battle, bringing in reinforcements from all adjacent tiles on the campaign map, using individual units' abilities, keeping an eye on their strengths and weaknesses and synergies, and just planning flanking maneuvers or securing optimal positioning, bringing in off-map support with the help of abilities you've unlocked through research on the campaign map. There is so much going on across multiple layers of gameplay. I love the blend of the turn-based campaign map and the turn-based tactical battles. I think it's absolutely beautiful. There's an interesting variety in factions, available technologies, unit types, and traits and abilities, and they keep the base game engaging for multiple hours, with DLC available to add more of all of that if you want it. Planetfall remains a fun game, and at this price, it'd definitely be worth going back to it if you skipped it at launch. Frostpunk remains one of my favorite city builders, and regardless of your opinion of the second game, the fact of the matter is that the first one is completely different in terms of mechanics and systems, meaning it's still worth picking up. Set during an apocalyptic ice age that froze the world in the Victorian era, you find yourself in charge of cities and people trying their best to survive in these new circumstances. The game introduces a multitude of new and innovative ideas in the interest of being a survival city builder, and it remains the best among its peers. It is truly genre-defining. A radial grid built around a central generator plays a key role as you keep an eye on the thermometer, preparing for temperature drops and the general need for heat in these circumstances. Powering all of this requires a constant source of coal, some mined locally, others brought in from points of interest on the regional map, and of course, where there's people, there's hungry mouths. Research new tech to improve your capabilities, try and maintain people's morale, and make actual challenging moral choices as you establish policies ranging from the abolishment or acceptance of child labor to what's done with the dead and injured, and much, much more besides. Actions and decisions have very real consequences in Frostpunk, and you feel those consequences through the interaction you have with the people living in your cities. And the DLC adds many more scenarios, including a prequel storyline that has a very unique set of mechanics to go with it. Frostpunk, in my humble opinion, is still, to this day, worth full price. So at this price point, despite the fact that there's a sequel now, because of how different the first Frostpunk plays, and because again of how genre-defining it was, at this price point, I say again, it's practically stealing. You should definitely pick up Frostpunk. 2 Point Campus is an excellent tycoon and management game that follows in the footsteps of 2 Point Hospital and predecessors like Theme Hospital and Theme Park from Bullfrog Studios back in the day. The next game in the series, 2 Point Museum, will be releasing early next year, and it'll be putting you in charge of, you guessed it, museums. But with 2 Point Campus, you're in charge of running universities that offer degrees in a variety of, let's call them, non-traditional subjects like magic and knighthood, and then sometimes more grounded ones too, but with a comedic twist like chef school or archaeology. You'll need to build classrooms and dorms and study and activity spaces, decorating them and adding various tools to enhance the students' learning experience in both sets of spaces. And you'll establish clubs, staff rooms, and much, much more besides, all in the interest of creating a quality establishment. Hire and train staff, manage timetables, throw student union events, and plan semester after semester as you take students from their first year through to graduation, with each course requiring different numbers of years, of course. Balance your budget, acquire additional plots of land, mix and match the right degree offerings, and journey from campus location to campus location as you juggle moody students and teachers alike. 2 Point Campus is a fantastic management game that has a great sense of humor layered on top of a solid set of very serious mechanics, and its DLC adds some additional courses alongside associated rooms and props. But honestly, the base game is plenty of fun. If you're looking for a new management game to take on, I can definitely recommend this one. Sweet Transit is a gorgeous transport tycoon / city building game with more depth than first meets the eye, and a focus on the city building aspects more so than the transit networks alluded to in the title. Set during the early days of trains, you'll find yourself not just managing the transportation side of things, but establishing multiple cities as well as the lines that connect them and the various needs between them. The needs of the people living in the various population hubs will determine what you'll want to build in your cities and the kinds of resources you'll pursue, going hand in hand, like in most city builders, only this time with the added logistics of managing the more intricate elements of a rail network. You'll need to build up a train depot, you'll need to lay down tracks, you'll build custom stations to suit your needs, and you need to place signals to ensure your trains can properly navigate junctions and, well, the tracks in general. Beyond that, you'll purchase locomotives and train cars to design trains, and then you'll need to plan routes to optimize the pickup and drop-off of goods and workers alike, sprawling across the massive procedurally generated map as you do so. Sweet Transit is an underappreciated game that's definitely worth more than its current price tag, and it's well worth taking for a spin. Kingdom Come Deliverance, admittedly, is an outlier in this list. It's not a traditional strategic or tactical game, I know. However, the way it approaches a lot of common RPG elements elevates it, in my opinion, to a game that requires a decent amount of thought and planning to play well, featuring a lot of elements that fans of the aforementioned genres might like. There's a lot of overlap between fans of Kingdom Come Deliverance and a bunch of strategic and tactical titles out there. That's why I covered it on my channel back in the day, and that's why I'll recommend it here, especially considering the sequel is just a couple of months away now. Kingdom Come Deliverance tells the story of a blacksmith's son whose hometown was raided by foreign invaders, forcing him to flee and take on a quest of vengeance. Combat is extremely punishing with a very unique and immersive approach where it's not just about damage type and swing direction, but where armor layering makes a difference and where things like wearing a great helm limits your vision. Stealing loot requires you to seek out a fence, or otherwise many quests can be approached in sensible, alternative ways, requiring you to really think laterally, especially if you fail what might be considered the regular approach with a bad dice roll. The game really is something absolutely special, extremely immersive, and if you haven't played it yet, even if you're not a fan of RPGs, you should absolutely give it a shot at this price. Again, especially with the sequel coming out early next year, you want to know exactly what you're missing out on if you skipped out on Kingdom Come Deliverance, because that'll help you make a decision when Part 2 comes out in February. There it is, folks, 10 games that are currently ridiculously cheap and well worth picking up to try out. If you found something you liked here, don't hesitate to hit the like button down below, and for more recommendations of games to pick up on the winter sale if you have a bit more money to spare, check out the video linked on screen right now. Otherwise, as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big ol' thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.